last stand battlefield was broken and burning. Ash drifted in the air like black snow, and the ground shook with the thunder of marching boots. Lyra stood alone on the cracked stone, her arms heavy, her chest heaving, her spear trembling in her hands. Her people were gone, her squad destroyed. Only she remained to face the circle of enemies closing in. They came from every side, armored and cruel, their blades gleaming in the firelight. The laughter was cold, mocking the lone warrior who still stood though she had no chance. Lyra's heart pounded, but her eyes stayed fierce. She would not beg, she would not kneel. Her world had fallen, but her pride would not. The leader of the enemy stepped forward, tall and scarred, his voice sharp as steel. "Lay down your weapon, girl, your fight is over. No one will come to save you." Lyra gripped her spear tighter, blood dripping from her palms. Her answer was simple, a whisper through cracked lips. "Then I fight until I fall." The circle closed, and with a cry, Lyra lunged. Her spear cut the air, striking one, then another. Her movements wild yet filled with desperate fire. For a moment she pushed them back, but the weight of numbers pressed in, blades flashing, shields slamming against her. Her spear clashed, cracked, and at last, with a sharp snap, the wood split in her hands. She froze, staring at the broken weapon. Her only hope was gone, and the enemy laughed louder, stepping closer. Her breath shook, her arms dropped, and yet her eyes still burned with defiance. If this was her end, she would meet it standing. The leader raised his sword high, the edge glinting red in the flames. "Die as your people died." Proud but powerless, he snarled. Lyra closed her eyes, bracing for the strike. The world slewed, the heat of the fire heavy on her skin, the silence of death wrapping around her. But then, the silence shattered. A roar split the air, not the roar of the enemy, not the scream of her people, but something strange, something fierce. The sky itself seemed to break open, and from above, something fell like a comet. It hit the ground with a crash, stone cracking, dust exploding outward. The enemy staggered back, shielding their eyes. Lyra's own eyes snapped open, confusion filling her heart. Through the smoke, a figure rose, tall, broad, carrying no blade of their kind, but something stranger, heavier, humming with strange power. The figure turned, and for the first time, Lyra saw his face. It was not like her people, nor the enemies. His skin was pale compared to theirs, his eyes sharp and bright with fire, his mouth curved in a grin that was almost reckless. He looked at her, blood on her lips, a broken spear in her hand, and he spoke in a voice rough but steady. "Mind if I join the fight?" For a moment, Lyra could not speak. She had never seen one of his kind before, but she had heard the old whispers, the scattered tales of a species that lived far from her world, a people stubborn, fierce, impossible to break. The word rose in her mind, a word the galaxy spoke with half awe, half disbelief, human. Before she could answer, the human moved. He charged into the circle with no hesitation, his strange weapon roaring with fire and thunder. Enemies fell back, screaming. Some struck down before they even understood what they faced. The air shook with every strike, and the man laughed, not cruelly, but like a warrior finally free to fight. Lyra, stunned, lifted the broken half of her spear. Her heart pounded with new fire, her fear cracked apart, replaced by something she had not felt in hours. Hope. The human fought like a storm, but he fought not for himself alone. His eyes kept flicking to her, guarding her, covering her. He was not here by accident. No, he was here to stand with her. The enemy snarled, regrouping, their leader shouting in rage. "This is nothing, one more fool to kill. Take them both." But Lyra felt the shift, the change in the air. She was no longer alone, and together, perhaps, they could survive. She tightened her grip on the broken spear, lifted her chin, and stepped to the human's side. He glanced at her, his grin still wide, sweat and ash streaking his face. "Not dead yet," he said, half mocking, half proud. She met his eyes and answered, voice steady, "Not dead at all." The circle closed again, But this time, Lyra was not afraid. She stood shoulder to shoulder with the strange warrior from the sky, two against many. Yet together, their fire burned brighter than the enemy's steel. The last stand had become something new, not an ending, but a beginning. The unexpected allied battlefield burned around them, flames rising higher as night closed in. The human stood with his strange weapon smoking, the ground littered with fallen enemies. Lyra clutched the broken shaft of her spear, her arms shaking, her body screaming with pain, yet her heart beating stronger than before. She was no longer alone. The enemies had not expected this. Their lines broke in confusion. Their leader shouted, but even his voice carried fear now. The human's sudden arrival had shattered their confidence. Lyra could see it in their eyes, the way they glanced at him like he was something more than flesh, something unnatural. The human looked at her, his chest rising and falling, his grin wide despite the dust and blood on his face. "You can fight," he said simply, as if it were the only thing that mattered. Lyra nodded, though her spear was broken. Her pride was not. "I will fight until the end," she answered, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. He gave a short laugh, half relief, half challenge. "Good, then we'll fight together." The enemy roared and surged forward again, desperate to crush the pair before more resistance could rise. The human lifted his weapon, and thunder burst from it, a noise that shook the stone itself. Flashes of light split the air, enemies falling in streaks of fire and smoke. Lyra's heart pounded. She had never seen a weapon like his. So loud, so fast, so deadly. Yet even as he struck them down, he moved like a warrior, not hiding behind his weapon, but charging forward. He kicked, struck, and swung the heavy weapon like a staff when the enemy came too close. Lyra found herself fighting at his side, her broken spear used like a dagger, stabbing where his blows left openings. Together they moved like they had fought for years. Though this was their first battle, the enemy's leader roared in rage, charging toward them, his blade raised high. The human met him head-on, sparks flying as steel clashed against the strange metal of the human's weapon. The two locked in brutal struggle, strength against strength. Lyra's eyes widened. This human did not falter. His face twisted with effort, but his stance unbroken. She darted forward, striking the leader's leg with her broken spear. He stumbled, and the human slammed his fist into the enemy's face, sending him crashing to the ground. The circle of soldiers faltered, their courage breaking for the first time. The mighty force that had crushed her people wavered. The human turned to her, breathing hard, his grin fading into something calmer. "Steadier, time to move," he said, his eyes scanning the shadows. Lyra frowned, confused. "Move? Why? We can finish them." But he shook his head, his voice low and sharp. "No, more will come. They'll flood this place. We need ground they don't control." Now, she hesitated, her pride screaming to finish the fight, to strike down every enemy left. But then she looked at the broken shaft in her hands, the emptiness where her people had once stood beside her. She swallowed her anger and nodded, where the human didn't answer with words. He simply grabbed her arm and pulled. They ran together, darting through smoke and broken stone. The enemy shouted behind them, but the fire and ruin slowed their pursuit. Lyra stumbled once, her legs weak from exhaustion, but the human caught her, dragging her back to her feet without breaking stride. At last they slipped into the ruins beyond the battlefield. Walls broken, towers crumbling. The place was silent except for the distant roar of fire and the screams of the dying. The human guided her into the shadow of a fallen arch, where they crouched low, their breaths loud in the stillness. For a long moment neither spoke. Only the crackle of fire filled the air. Then Lyra turned, her eyes fierce with questions. "Who are you?" she demanded. "And why did you fall from the sky into my battle?" The man leaned back, resting his strange weapon across his knees, his grin returning, tired but playful. "Name's Cain," he said. "And as for why I'm here, let's just say the universe dropped me in the right place at the right time." Lyra narrowed her eyes, suspicion and curiosity mixing. "You are human?" she said slowly, testing the word on her tongue. He raised a brow, surprised. You know about us. Only whispers, she admitted. Stories of stubborn creatures who never yield, even when broken. He chuckled, shaking his head. Not all stories are lies then. She studied him, his strange face, his reckless grin, the fire in his eyes. There was something about him that stirred her spirit, something raw and unshaken. For the first time since the fall of her people, she felt the weight on her chest lighten, just a little. Perhaps fate had not abandoned her after all. Outside, the enemy regrouped, their hunt beginning anew. But in the ruins, two warriors, one alien, one human, prepared for what came next. The last stand was no longer hers alone. It had become their fight. Secrets in the ruins were quiet except for the echo of distant flames. Broken towers leaned like old bones, and shattered stone bridges stretched across pits of shadow. Here, the enemy's footsteps were muffled, their voices distant. The Lyra knew they were still hunting. She leaned against the wall of a fallen temple, her chest heaving, her arm burning where blood seeped from a deep cut. King crouched nearby, his strange weapon balanced across his lap. He tore strips of cloth from his own clothing and handed them to her without a word. She hesitated, pride pricking her, but at last she took them, pressing them against her wound. You risk your life for someone you do not know, she said softly. Cain smirked, wiping sweat and ash from his brow. Guess I have a bad habit of jumping into fights. Lyra tilted her head, her eyes sharp. You fight differently. Your weapon is unlike anything I've seen. Your movements are reckless, but effective. Cain chuckled, his grin flashing. That's humans for you. We don't always do things the smart way, but we do them our way. The words struck her again. Human. The whispers she had heard as a child returned to her mind. Stories of a strange people on a distant world who never bowed, never broke. She had thought them myths, like spirits told to children to inspire courage. Yet one sat before her, flesh and blood, with a smile as if the world had not nearly killed him. The silence grew heavy between them, filled only by the crackle of fire far away. At last Cain broke it, his voice lower now, serious. Why were you standing alone out there, with nothing but a broken spear and no one at your back? Her chest tightened, shame and anger mixing. My people fought to protect this land, but they were cut down. One by one, I was the last. I swore I would stand until I could no longer breathe. Her fingers tightened on the broken shaft of her spear. I failed them, but I would not let the enemy take my spirit too. Cain's grin faded, his eyes softer now. That's not failure, that's survival. And survival means you live to fight another day. She frowned, his words strange to her. To fight another day is to live with dishonor. She whispered, honor means nothing if you're dead. Cain replied firmly, I've seen too many graves filled with honorable fools. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is live. The words struck her like a blow, sharp and cutting. Her people had always believed that dying in battle was the greatest victory, but this human spoke as if life itself was the greater prize. For a long time she sat in silence, staring at the cracks in the stone beneath her hands, and she wondered, could both be true? A sudden sound broke her thoughts, the scrape of boots against stone. Cain was on his feet in an instant, his weapon raised, his eyes narrowing. Shadows flickered across the ruined arches, enemy scouts moving quietly, their blades glinting in the firelight. Lyra's heart pounded, her hand tightening on her broken spear. They found us, Cain muttered, his voice calm but sharp. He glanced at her, his grin returning though his eyes stayed cold. Ready to show me what you've got? Her pride flared, her body aching but her spirit ignited. I will not fall here, she answered, her voice steady. The scouts slipped closer, their movements silent, their faces cruel. Cain raised his weapon, the thunderous roar shattering the silence. To fell before the others even realized what had struck. The rest scattered, some rushing toward him, others toward her. Lyra lunged, her broken spear stabbing like a fang, catching one in the throat. Her body moved with old training, but now there was something more. His presence beside her gave her strength. They fought back to back, Cain's weapon blazing fire, her spear striking in fierce rhythm. The ruins filled with chaos, dust, and the sharp cries of dying foes. And when the last one fell, silence returned. Heavy and trembling, Cain lowered his weapon, breathing hard, his grin faint. "You fight well, even with a stick," he teased. Lyra wiped blood from her cheek, glaring at him though her lips curved with the faintest smile. "And you fight like a madman, loud and reckless." "Yeah," Cain said with a shrug. "But we're alive." They sat again in the shadow of the temple, the bodies of scouts cooling round them. Lyra stared into the firelit night, her mind spinning. This human was unlike any warrior she had ever met. His courage was strange, his honor stranger still. Yet something about him made her believe that maybe, just maybe, her fight was not yet lost. She whispered softly, more to herself than to him. "Perhaps the galaxy is larger than I knew." Morning came with a gray sky, heavy with ash and smoke. The ruins lay silent, broken by the cries of distant carrion birds. Lyra rose stiffly from the cold stone floor, her body aching, but her spirit alive. Cain was already awake, sitting on a fallen pillar, cleaning the strange weapon he carried with careful hands. "You don't rest long," she said, her voice tired but sharp. Cain glanced up, his grin faint, but still there. "War doesn't rest." "So neither can I." She studied him for a long time, the way he moved, the way his eyes scanned the ruins, always searching, always ready. There was recklessness in him, yes, but also something else: discipline, focus, and a strange kind of calm. It unsettled her, and yet it fascinated her too. Her people had called humans a myth, but this one sat before her as real as stone, and she could not deny he had saved her life, again and again. Yet still, her pride burned within her, a fire that would not go out. She had sworn never to need help, never to bend, never to admit weakness. Cain noticed her silence, his voice softer now. "You don't trust me, do you?" Her jaw tightened. "You are different, but trust is not given, it is earned." He nodded slowly, as if her words did not surprise him. "Fair enough, but trust cuts both ways, warrior girl." The words stung, sharper than she expected. She opened her mouth to argue, but the sound of heavy steps interrupted her. She froze, Cain's eyes narrowing as he slid down from the pillar. Weapon ready, figures emerged from the smoke. Tall armored soldiers, with the mark of the enemy burned into their armor. There were too many this time, at least a dozen, and they moved with the confidence of hunters who believed their prey already caught. One of them, taller than the rest, pointed toward Lyra, his voice a growl. "The last of the spear-bearers, still alive, bound by honor, but broken in body. Surrender and you may be spared." Her pride flared hot, her grip tightening on her broken spear. "I will not kneel," she spat, her voice sharp. The leader laughed, the sound cruel and mocking. "Then you will die crawling, and your world will forget you." Cain stepped forward, his weapon raised, his voice calm but filled with steel. "She won't be dying today." The soldiers laughed at him, a single human standing against their numbers. To them, he looked like nothing, a strange creature in simple clothes, holding a weapon they did not understand. But Lyra saw the fire in his eyes, and something in her chest shifted. She whispered low, almost to herself, "You fight as if her shame were your own." Cain glanced at her, smirk tugging at his lips. "Guess it is now." The battle erupted in an instant. The soldiers surged forward, blades flashing, their boots shaking the stone. Cain's weapon roared, spitting thunder and fire, 3 soldiers falling before they even raised their shields. Lyra lunged beside him, her broken spear striking with desperate fury, each blow fueled by pride and rage. The fight was chaos, stone shattering, blood spilling, cries echoing across the ruins. Cain fought like a storm, reckless but unyielding, every strike pushing the enemy back. Lyra fought like fire, fierce and sharp, her pride burning bright. Together, they held the line, though every moment pushed them closer to the edge. At last the leader stood before them, his blade black with ash, his armor scarred. He sneered at Cain, his voice thick with contempt. "You are no warrior, human. You fight like a beast, No honor, no grace, Cain smirked, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Honor doesn't win battles, survival does. The leader roared and swung, his blade crashing down. Cain barely dodged, the force of the blow shaking the ground. Lyra darted forward, her spear shattering against the leader's armor, splintering into useless fragments. She fell back, chest heaving, her pride twisting into pain. Her weapon was gone, her strength fading, and for a moment, shame filled her heart. But Cain stepped in front of her, raising his weapon again. "You're not done yet," he said without looking back. "Not as long as I'm here." The leader charged again, but this time Lyra moved differently. Instead of striking with the broken spear, she seized a fallen blade from the ground. Her pride whispered she should never use the enemy's weapon, but her spirit screamed louder: survival, fight, live. With a cry, she drove the blade into the leader's side as Cain's weapon roared again. The enemy collapsed, his body crashing into the dirt, his soldiers fleeing into the smoke. Silence fell once more, heavy and sharp. Lyra stood trembling, the stolen blade shaking in her hand. Cain turned to her, his grin faint but his eyes steady. "See, sometimes pride is just another chain." Her breath caught, her chest tight. He was right, and the truth cut deeper than any blade. For the first time, she wondered if her people's pride had blinded them, if their chains were not forged by the enemy but by themselves. And in the ruins, with a human at her side, she felt the weight of those chains begin to break. Fire and blood, the ruins still smoked, their broken stones glowing with faint embers. The air was thick with the stench of iron and ash, and the cries of the dying still echoed far beyond the shattered walls. Lyra stood with the stolen blade still in her hand, her body trembling, but her spirit unbroken. Beside her, Cain lowered his strange weapon, its surface hot, his hands dark with soot and blood. They had survived, but survival came at a cost. Her wounds burned, her arms felt heavy, and her pride was torn between shame and newfound strength. Cain, too, carried exhaustion in every breath, yet his eyes still carried the fire of battle. He looked at her and gave a small grin, one that carried no mockery, but quiet respect. "You fight like hell, warrior girl," he said, his voice rough but steady. She turned her gaze to him, her chest still rising and falling. "And you fight like no warrior I have ever seen," she replied softly. It was not praise, not entirely, but it was not an insult either. It was something in between, something she could not yet name. Before either could speak again, a new sound broke the silence, a low rumble, distant at first, but growing louder, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Cain's head snapped toward the broken horizon, his jaw tightening. "Reinforcements," he muttered, his voice grim. Through the smoke, shadows moved, dozens of soldiers, armored and ready, their banners rising above the flames. This time it was no scouting party, no small band of hunters. It was an army, their steps shaking the stone as they advanced like a storm. Lyra's heart tightened, her hand clenching on the blade. She had fought against armies before, and she knew the truth. This time there would be no victory. Her voice was low, heavy. "There are too many. Even with your weapon, even with both of us, we cannot hold them." Cain stood silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing, his weapon heavy in his grip. Then he turned to her, his grin sharp, but his voice calm. "Then we don't fight to win, we fight to survive." The words stung her pride, but they also lit something within her, a spark of hope, small but burning. The soldiers surged closer, their torches lighting the night, their voices chanting. Cain raised his weapon and opened fire, thunder splitting the sky. The first line of soldiers fell, but the others pressed forward, relentless, unyielding. Lyra leapt into the fray, her stolen blade flashing, cutting through armor and flesh. The ruins became fire and blood, every strike a cry of defiance, every breath a battle. They fought side by side, surrounded yet unbroken. Cain's weapon roared, her blade sang, and together they became a storm within the storm. The soldiers pressed harder, arrows darkening the sky, spears flashing from every side. Cain's arm bled where a blade had grazed him. Lyra's leg shook where an arrow had torn her flesh. But neither stopped. Neither faltered. The enemy leader raised his banner high, calling for their capture. Take them alive. Break them. Let their screams echo across the ruins, he roared. But his words only fueled them. Lyra struck with renewed fury. Her pride no longer a chain, but a weapon. Cain fought like a beast unleashed, every strike filled with fire. Still, the weight of numbers pressed down. For every soldier they cut down, two more rose from the smoke. Their backs touched, their breaths heavy, their blood staining the broken stones. And for the first time, fear crept into Lyra's heart, not of death, but of failing beside him. Cain glanced at her, his grin faint but still alive. If this is the end, at least I've got good company, he said, his voice steady. Her heart twisted, and she found herself answering, this is not the end, not while we still breathe. The battle raged, the ruins trembling, the sky lit with fire, and just when their strength began to fade, a new sound echoed across the field, a horn. Long and low, the soldiers froze, their leader shouting in confusion. From the hills beyond the ruins, shapes appeared, warriors carrying the banners of Lyra's people, the last survivors who had not yet fallen. Lyra's eyes widened, her spirit surging. My kin, she whispered, her voice breaking. Cain fired again, his grin fierce. Guess the cavalry showed up. The enemy faltered, their lines breaking as the survivors charged, their cries shaking the night. Hope returned to the ruins, hope written in fire and blood. Lyra raised her blade high, shouting with all her strength, fight, fight for the living, fight for the fallen. Cain stood beside her, his weapon blazing, his heart pounding. Together, they led the charge, their voices rising above the chaos. And in that moment, though the ruins burned and the air was thick with death, Lyra felt something she had never known before. Not just pride, not just survival, but a bonfire and blood, shared between her and the human who had fallen from the sky. Asterisk, the oath of Servaville ruins were no longer silent. They rang with the clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, and the roar of Cain's weapon. Lyra's people had come, battered and bloodied, but not broken, their banners rising like flames through the smoke. The enemy forces, once so certain of their victory, now staggered, caught between the fury of the survivors and the fire of a single human. Lyra fought at the front, her blade flashing, her voice rising above the chaos. Her pride was no longer a chain, no longer a weight. It had become a weapon, sharp and unyielding. Each strike she made was not just for herself, but for her people, for those who had fallen, and for the strange warrior who fought beside her. Cain moved like a storm at her side, reckless yet focused, his weapons spitting thunder and flame. Every shot shook the battlefield. Every strike broke the enemy's will. Yet she could see the strain in him too, the weariness in his steps, the pain in his wounds. Still, he fought on, his grin flashing even through blood and smoke. At last, the enemy leader gave the order to retreat, his voice filled with rage and fear. The soldiers pulled back, dragging their wounded, their banners falling into the dirt. A cheer rose from Lyra's kin, weary voices crying out in victory. The ruins, for now, belonged to them. Lyra stood among the broken stones, her chest heaving, her blade stained with blood. Her kin gathered round her, their eyes wide, their voices whispering. She was the last of the spear bearers, the one they thought lost, and she had returned with a stranger at her side. Their gazes turned to Cain, confusion and awe mixing in their eyes. What is he? One of them whispered. What kind of creature fights like that? Lyra's voice was steady, though her heart raced. He is human, she said simply. The words spread among her kin like fire, disbelief turning to wonder. Humans were myths, stories told in the dark. Yet here was one, living and breathing, his weapon still smoking in his hands. Cain glanced at them, scratching the back of his neck with a sheepish grin. They're looking at me like I'm some kind of monster, he muttered. Lyra almost smiled, though her face remained firm. Not a monster, she said quietly, something else. That night, they gathered in the ruins. Fires lit among the broken stones. The wounded were tended, the dead honored, and food was shared though it was scarce. Lyra sat with her kin, Cain beside her, their voices low but steady. The elders spoke of their people's oath, an oath of honor, an oath of survival passed down through generations. But as they spoke, Lyra felt something stirring within her. She remembered Cain's words, his belief that survival was not weakness, but strength. She thought of the chains of pride that had nearly broken her, and of the fire that burned brighter when shared. For the first time, she questioned the old ways, not with shame, but with hope. When the elders finished, Lyra stood, her body weary but her spirit alight. Her kin turned to her, their eyes expectant. She lifted her blade, her voice carrying across the camp. We have lost much, but we still live, and as long as we live, we can fight. Pride alone did not save us. Honor alone did not keep us standing. It was survival. It was unity. It was fire shared between us, her kin murmured, their voices uneasy, for her words challenged old truths. But Cain rose beside her, his presence steady, his voice strong. Where I come from, we fight because we must. We endure because we have no choice. We don't call it honor. We don't call it pride. We call it survival. And survival is victory. The camp fell silent, the words sinking deep, and slowly, one by one, voices rose in agreement, not in the old chants of pride, but in something new, something forged in fire and blood, an oath not of chains, but of freedom. That night, under the broken sky, they swore the oath of survival, to fight together, to endure together, and to rise from the ruins stronger than before. Lyra felt the weight of her people's eyes on her, but for the first time, it did not feel like a burden. It felt like a beginning. Beside her, Cain smiled faintly, his eyes tired but proud. Guess you're not chained anymore, he said quietly. She turned to him, her heart steady, her pride reshaped. No, she answered, I am free. A new dawn, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. It touched the broken ruins with soft gold, turning ash and stone into a field of quiet fire. The air was still, heavy with smoke and memory, but also filled with a strange peace. For the first time in many nights, there was no sound of marching boots, no clash of steel, no roar of enemy horns. Lyra stood on the highest stone of the temple ruins, her hair stirred by the cold wind. She looked out across her people, gathered in small groups, tending wounds, sharing food, whispering in tired voices. They were fewer now, scarred and weary, but alive, and in their eyes, she saw something she had feared lost forever: hope. Beside her, Cain leaned against the stone, his strange weapon resting on his shoulder. His body bore bruises and cuts, his clothes torn, but his grin was still there, faint yet stubborn. You've got fighters who don't know how to quit, he said, his voice rough but steady. They remind me of home. Lyra turned her gaze to him, her eyes sharp but softened by respect. Your words changed them, she admitted quietly. You changed me. Cain chuckled, shaking his head. I didn't change you, warrior girl. You were always strong. I just reminded you that strength doesn't always have to break. His words struck her deeper than any blade. She thought of the oath they had sworn, the promise of survival, not just pride. It was new, dangerous even, but it felt right. It felt like freedom. A group of her kin approached, led by the eldest among them, their faces grave, but their steps steady. They bowed their heads to Lyra, a gesture of respect she had never expected to receive. You stood when none of us could, the elder said, their voice rough with age and sorrow. You carried us when we thought all was lost, and you brought us this. Human, the elder's gaze shifted to Cain, filled with curiosity and unease. What place does he have among us? They asked. Lyra's voice was steady, her answer sure. He fought for us when no one else would. He stood when even I was ready to fall. His place is beside us. If he chooses it. Cain raised a brow, his grin flickering. Sounds like you're offering me a job, he teased. Her lips curved, just slightly. Not a job, Cain. A place. The camp stirred with whispers, but none spoke against her. The memory of the night's battle was still fresh, and the human's fire was proof enough. Slowly, the unease gave way to acceptance. and then to respect. In that moment, Cain became more than an outsider, he became part of their oath. The sun rose higher, burning away the shadows. The ruins still stood broken, but now they were no longer a tomb. They were a beginning, a place where something new could be born. Lyra lifted her blade high, its surface still scarred with blood and battle. Her voice carried across her kin, strong and unyielding. "We are not broken," she declared. "We are not chains. We are not ashes. We are fire, and we will rise again. This is not the end of us. It is the dawn of something greater." Her people answered with a roar, their voices rising together, a cry of defiance and rebirth. The sound shook the air, a promise to the stars that they would not fade. Cain stood among them, his grin wide, his voice joining theirs for the first time. He was not a stranger in a broken land. He was one of them, bound not by blood, but by fire and choice. As the cries echoed into the morning sky, Lyra felt the weight of her pride shift into something new. It was no longer a chain, no longer a burden. It was a flame, shared and alive, and she knew that with Cain beside her, and with her people united, they would not just survive, they would rise. The dawn burned brighter, and the story of the last spear bearer and the human who fell from the sky had only just begun.